So thanks so much for being here this morning and for coming and hanging out in the conflict workshop, which is usually a word that's pretty scary for people. My name is Megan, like I said earlier when I welcome people in the main room. I am one of the pastors here at Transformation City, specifically in the areas of worship and children's ministry. So that's where I work. I've been in ministry here for almost 8 years and have been involved in worship ministry since I was in high school, so more years than I want to be aware of right now. I'm also a MDiv student at Northern Seminary, which is just outside of Chicago, and so the material that I am sharing with you today is stuff that I have learned through my experiences at Northern, and specifically with a class over the last year through the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center. So I will be sharing more about that at the end. But naturally, I don't like conflict. Naturally, I avoid it at all costs. I grew up in a family where we just didn't talk about it, where it was just like, okay, well, that's going to be really complicated, so, they're just like that. That's kind of how it was addressed, and so that's how I learned to handle conflict. We all learn to handle it one way or the other. So maybe you came from a family that was much more explosive with their ways of dealing with conflict. My husband grew up in a family where, all right, well, I'm mad at you right now, so we're just going to do this, which wasn't really resolution either. It was just a more loud version of what was in my family, where we still aren't listening to each other, we still aren't hearing each other, but his was loud and mine was silent. So we all learn to deal with conflict in a way, and I would invite you as we get started to reflect on maybe what your relationship with conflict is as we get into things today. Because this is going to be a little bit interactive. You're not going to have to talk too much, but you are going to have to talk some. So who experiences conflict anyway, especially in churches? Like, that doesn't exist, right? Like, there's no such thing. Ha! So I'm going to share, like I said, I've been leading worship since I was in high school, so there's just been like 1 or 2 times where things have gotten a little dicey. But one story I do want to share today is a couple years ago when I was leading here, and at that point, it wasn't a single worship leader, worship pastor, it was a team of like 4 of us that were sharing the role. And a person had introduced a song, one of the leaders had introduced a song like a month prior, and then when it was my turn to lead again, I said, I want to lead that song too. I don't really like this bridge part though, because that doesn't make any sense to me, so I'm going to lead it differently. I'm going to do the verses and the choruses, but I'm going to just leave the bridge out. And this other leader who had introduced the song initially was playing drums that week, and so we're rehearsing and we're going through it, and here we just have rehearsal Sunday morning before church. So it's like, we don't have a whole lot of time to get into stuff, so we're running through the song and we get to the part where we would go to the bridge, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna go back to the chorus again, and he stops. And when the drummer stops, it's like a screeching stop. And he's like, you can't lead it like that. You have to do the bridge. And me, as both non-conflictual but also very stubborn, was like, no, this is how I'm leading it, and you need to get on board, because I'm leading this week. Which probably wasn't the most helpful approach, but that's where I went. So, as you can imagine, that went really well. He ended up walking out of practice. We were like, I don't know what's going to happen in service today. I ended up backing down and just putting the bridge back in the song because I was like, we just have to get this done. And it ended up with this big mess of just we're mad at each other. The rest of the team is like, I don't know what's going on. So what ended up happening was one of the elders from our board, who was also involved with worship ministry, came and called a meeting with the 2 of us, and we sat down and we mediated it. Because at that point, when you have conflict within a team or within a church, you can't just ignore it, because it's going to keep coming up. And we don't want to just leave each other. That happens too much as it is in the church. So we have to face it. We have to face it head on. So we'll get more into the mediation process and how that all goes in a little bit. But first, I want to hear from you all. And I am going to sit down during this, but kind of what your role is. There we go. What your role is in your church, whether you are just a congregant or you are part of worship ministry, what your experience has been with conflict, and like, has that happened to you or not? You don't have to go into deep specifics. And then what are your feelings about conflict generally? So like I said at the beginning, thinking about what your relationship to conflict is. So, Krista, you're right there, so I'm going to make you start.
Yeah. Just go through those quickly.
Let's go through those
yeah.
quickly. Yeah.
So I am one of the worship leaders at Northwest Baptist. There was 2 of us. Now we have no drummer actually, so he now is the drummer. So it's just me. Mm-hmm. And my experience with conflict, so I would say more so in worship style, as I was telling you before. Our church has changed in the last few years. For 40 plus years, it's been 99.999% Caucasian. In the last 4 or 5 years, it is now 50% African American. Mm-hmm. So how do you change style to meet everyone's needs? And music is a big part. Those that were considered contemporary are now middle-aged dads, as we like to call them. So, it was contemporary in 97, but I was also like 11. So they don't like to hear that so much. But, so that's where some of the conflict has come through. It's been very low-key, but definitely some discussions. My feelings on conflict, I don't like it at all, unless it's like really serious. But no, generally it's a passive-aggressive stance that I like to take, and sarcasm, and then laugh it off. So, yeah. Cool.
I'm Evan, and I go to Ethnos Church, which is a church plant by the Bradley Center. And what's the
like what your role is there, or you just go there, or
okay?
Not just go there. Do you go there or leadership? I don't know.
Yeah. So I help out with sound there, and
God bless you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's part of the team, and there's different frustrations and certainly joys with that. So.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And how do you feel about conflict generally?
I'm pretty much an avoider.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
I'm Ashley, and I'm one of the worship leaders at Homebrook Church in Brookfield. I'm also vocal team leader and help like all the people learn the parts and write the parts and all that stuff. And so I deal with a lot of girls. Because girls, especially singers, can tend to be really catty. So there's been things in the past that are like hard to manage, but I get the joy of telling them if they're dressed inappropriately or anything. So even though I'm like definitely an avoider, that has kind of pulled me out of that, rather forcefully at times. But yeah, in my family it was always a let's just not talk about it kind of thing, and it's kind of been like that a little bit at my house too. But in the church we've had some things over the last 10 years that conflict seems to come in waves, and it can get pretty explosive, and I've seen the damage it does, and we need to fix that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth. I guess I'm part of a team. We actually have a leader of the worship team, and I'm part of a team. For me, it's I have to constantly be reminding myself of that I come under the leadership of that, because I've got great ideas and wanting to kind of stretch them out of their comfort zone gently, but still stretch and that's just kind of how I function. The simple thing when I started, I think 3 years ago there, very much like you, I was just like, I think I sang this song in first grade. So just as I joined the team, I would gently, without them ever really knowing, I'm just like, so what year was that? And just to make them aware of, and it was funny, it didn't take too long that they started picking more current. I never said anything, I never, so that's kind of how I lead, like behind. Experience, actually, part of what drew me to this, I actually lead our finance team, and there was some conflict in that team recently to where I was just like, the two of them seem to have worked it out, but as the leader, I also don't want to assume that and let them know. And so I've been praying for like the last month of how to address this in a way that either doesn't ignite something that may already be taken care of, but at the same time show them my support as leader of that team. And then my feelings, so I was probably born and raised in the explosive kind of environment, and how I have chosen to live my life out of that. It isn't avoiding, I do tend to walk away to let things de-escalate before then I can come back to the table and let's discuss how we can handle this. Once emotions can get taken out of the picture.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for sharing and learn from each other. I love the idea of questioning. This song is really old, and so instead of being this song is really old, well, what year was that? That's a great tactic. So we will learn from each other as well. So we're going to do a little think, write, share, which is, if you're in teaching at all, you get a couple minutes to think, then you're going to write either on the note card, or I think you have a place to take notes in your folder as well, and then we're going to share as a group. So it's an introvert-friendly way to interact. So I want you to think first of a conflict either that you are currently experiencing or that you could imagine occurring if you don't have a current conflict. And it could be in your church or team, or it could be a personal conflict, whatever you want to come up with. So think of a conflict, and if you could contribute something, anything, and you don't necessarily have to have the skill set or the knowledge to do it, but just in your wildest dream, if you could contribute something to that, what would you hope to bring? What would you hope to bring? And what would the ideal outcome look like for you? I'm an idealist. I'm going to invite you all into that space. So the ideal outcome, what would it be for your team, for you, and for your church? And I want you to think about all three of those things, because I think we have a tendency sometimes to be like, well, as long as the church is doing well, it doesn't matter that I feel like garbage about this. You are also part of the church. So if you are feeling like garbage, then the church didn't solve it. There's a place to submit and to say, okay, I come under this, but there's a healthy way to submit that says, okay, I come under this leadership, and there's an unhealthy way to submit that says, I'm just tired of the conflict, so even though I still don't feel at rest about this, I'm just going to go along with it. So thinking about how you, your team, your church, or if you're thinking of a personal conflict, just how you and the other person or group of people are both doing it. So holding on to both of those, and whichever one of those you naturally gravitate toward more, like self-preservation or preservation of the whole, lean the opposite, because that's usually the one that's harder. So I'm going to give you all just a couple minutes, like 2 minutes to think, and then I'll just give you a cue to go ahead and write your answers to those questions, and then we're going to share them together. So go ahead and we're going to think quietly. and go ahead and write down what your thoughts are, what your answers are to the questions, either in specifics or to just riff on them a little bit. Take a couple minutes to do that. Sharing. So if there's someone who wants to share what their thoughts are first, you can just jump in. Not everybody has to share, but at least a couple of you have to.
Well, I hope I did this right.
Yeah.
If I could contribute something, I think the people I admire most are people who can mediate with being unbiased and level-headed and having their feet firmly planted in Scripture, and that's the kind of person that I would want to be, and that I feel like I'm trying to be. Again, sometimes girls get really, and then depending on the conflict, because sometimes it's something as simple as color of carpet, and then other things it's gospel-centered, like salvation issues. But for issues when it's like kind of an outrageous thing where someone's definitely in the wrong, I think seeing that reconciled in a way where that person isn't just condemned or cast out, but like ministered to, and reconciliation happens in those circumstances. And then if it is something that's, petty, to not just let that continue, but to talk to discuss as a group like what's really important.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
It does. You did it perfectly. That's great.
All right.
Anyone else want to share?
I'm not good.
No, you're good.
I guess for myself it would be if I could contribute something, just a completely different outlook. So being young and African American, and but also growing up in a predominantly white church, even back home, and just seeing a little bit more of both sides, hoping to bridge the two, but also maybe integrating so it doesn't have to be all or nothing, one style versus extreme opposite, full gospel, whatever. But then also the outcome would be for myself a little less stress in constantly thinking, is everyone able to worship? For our team, I think also just for them to feel empowered as well, that their thoughts and ideas matter, because I get it. They're getting a little bit older too and they want to feel connected as well. But for our church, that other people would also feel empowered to join in and not just be the 80-20 rule. And you guys got it. No, if the Lord has given you a gift, we would love for you to use it. Tired. So yeah, just for more in the community too.
Great. That's awesome.
I think what I would want to kind of contribute to any kind of conflict really is kind of like you had shared. One of the things that I'm told fairly often is that I am kind of level-headed in the conflict that I'm thinking about with our finance team. The treasurer is the one who brought it to my attention, and she, came to me and she's like, you're just so level that, and so I've heard from her, and this whole, I want to be able to sit down with the other person and hear from them, because I know that there's always two sides to a story, and just be able to then better identify whether I need to bring them together. You know, the ultimate outcome for me is I don't want to lose either of them from the team.
Yeah.
So I can see one potentially backing out, partly because of her age, that she's just like, but at the same time, I love having her part of the team because there's so much wisdom there, and she is, I'm a vision person, like big picture, and she is a detail, and I need those people on my team because I'm not that.
We call it the balloon to the string.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, you're the balloon and she's the string to keep you grounded.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. You want to share them?
Sure, yeah. So there's just, it's kind of, so for me, like, I grew up in kind of a suburban church, and then we have this city church that's supposed to be multicultural, and it is multicultural, multi-denominational, multi-everything.
Yeah.
And so,
No opportunities for conflict.
right. That's our secret. So I'm more used to like the Pentecostal side of the church is stretching for me. So I'm like, all right, let's have a system. My dad grew up Lutheran, so I'm like all about order and structure. And so I have a lot of ideas about that, but I tend to think like, well, I'm just being kind of anal about this, you know. Whereas like organization is one of my strengths, but so I just wrote like voicing my thoughts about that basically.
That's good. Yeah, so you're a structured person leading or running sound for like a Pentecostal like feel sometimes.
Right.
So you've got some, all right. No. You got some feels.
It's kind of a mix, but yeah.
Sure. All right, cool. Thank you all for sharing. All right, so never fear, conflict is here. This is how I'm trying to teach myself to think. I don't naturally think that way. But viewing conflict as an opportunity for God to work, for the Holy Spirit to move. I love what Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil says in her book, Roadmap to Reconciliation, which is specifically about racial reconciliation, but the principles apply across the board. I highly recommend it. Catalytic events are vital, as they are primary vehicles for moving people out of old patterns, assumptions, and perceptions and into transformative cycles of change. Transformative cycles of change. That to me sounds like gospel. It sounds like discipleship opportunities. It sounds like our conflict could lead us closer to God if we would let it. And so often I am so afraid of who might get hurt or what might happen, or I'm just being honest, like I might lose control of what I hold so dear, or God might move in a way that I don't really want God to move that direction, that we don't let it happen. And we shut it down. And in doing so, we miss opportunities for the kingdom of God to be more realized in our midst. So we're going to look at Matthew 18, 15 through 20. This is one of the examples in Scripture of conflict. And there's just a couple. What I love about the Bible is it's full of people. Like it's God's word, but it's full of people. And like people are these devastatingly amazing, complicated, frustrating beings that bear the image of God. And I'm constantly just in awe of like, this is it. Like this was really the plan to like help us understand what you are like is like all of our little messed up selves. That's the plan. Okay. But it's just incredible. So Matthew 18, 15 through 20. Which says this, if your brother or sister sins against you, go and correct them when you are alone together. Like if we just stop there, like how many conflicts in our churches and our personal lives would die down? Like, as soon as you have a conflict or someone sins against you, which sinning, like, let's just think of it as like you missed the mark. Right? Like, that's the historic, like, use of that word. You missed the mark. So we tend to think about sin in the church as like this big, like, oh, that was sin against me. But like, if somebody just misses the mark with you and you're person, hey, what you did, Krista, hurt me. And I know you probably didn't mean it like that. I'm so sorry. I was just texting somebody who's on my worship team who had texted me during the first session, and he was like, hey, why didn't we know about this? And I was like, because I dropped the ball, and I didn't get it in the bulletin, and I'm so sorry. Because I was so busy trying to like make sure this is all coordinated and write my workshop, and my semester started, and all these things. My daughter's going back to school, and there were so many freaking holidays that I dropped the ball, and I'm so sorry. And thank you for telling me that you were hurt by that. That if we just go straight to the person, you missed the mark with me. How many conflicts would stop there? So we'll get past the first verse. If your brother or sister sins against you, go and correct them when you are alone together. If they listen to you, you've won over your brother or sister. But if they won't listen, take with you one or two others, so that every word may be established by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. That doesn't say, go tell all your friends what they did to you. It says 2 or 3 people, trusted people who are mature in the faith. But if they still won't pay attention, report it to the church. If they won't pay attention even to the church, treat them as you would a Gentile and a tax collector. I assure you that whatever you fasten on earth will be fastened in heaven. Whatever you loosen on earth will be loosened in heaven. Again, I assure you that if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, then my Father who's in heaven will do it for you. For wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there with them. I love how Bruce took that verse this morning. I'm going to take it a little bit of a different way here today. And one thing I want to say there, so it says, like, treat them as you would a Gentile or a tax collector, which put people outside of the community of faith in Jewish culture. Jesus still ate with those people too. So as we think about, okay, even if we resolve that we're not going to see eye to eye here, that still doesn't give us permission to write that person off completely. It might mean there's another boundary there, but we refuse to see anybody as irreconcilable or irredeemable, because the work of Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit doesn't allow us to do that. Okay, so that's one example from Scripture. We're going to look at that throughout the course of the day. There's also a few instances in Acts 16, verses 1 through 7, and Acts 15, 1 through 35. I'm not going to take the time to read those all the way through right now. But I love that, we all hold up Acts 2 as yeah, we want to be that kind of church, and no one was in need, and they were together with everything. And by Acts 6, it's all messed up. And it continues to be this so it's like the widows aren't getting fed, or this group is getting food, but this group isn't getting as much food. There's favoritism, or there's this person is using their gifts, but they are a really gifted person, so they're just doing everything. Not that anybody in this room would know what that's like as leaders. And no one over here is doing their share. 80-20 rule. Yes. That starts happening almost immediately. So I always hold that in mind. I'm God, just make us the church like we were in Acts. God, make us a better church so maybe we don't end up messing it up so fast. John 17 is the prayer of Christ before he is crucified. And verses 20 through 23 specifically, he's praying for the disciples and for believers and for those whom God the Father has given to Christ. So that's us. And he prays, God, I ask that you would make them one, as I and you are one. And so I always think about that when I'm trying to approach conflict or approach reconciliation or whatever, that it's God, I know I'm in your will. Not just your will be done, your kingdom come, but I know this is your will because Jesus prayed it. And that gives me a little bit more spinal fortitude to walk into it. The other one that I want to point out is 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 6, 4-ish. It kind of Paul kind of wrangles their letters, so he just kind of keeps going. And the Corinthian church was this amazing community where there's a lot of gifts going on. There's a lot of richness in that community. And if you read those 2 letters, kind of all the way through, and kind of trace what's going on, and remembering that this was a real congregation, real time, and real issues and real people who were just as broken and messed up and frail and trying to figure all this out as we are. And you read some of the things, like in the first letter to the Corinthians, all of these gifts, and people are healing, and people are worshiping, and people are serving. And then we have that chapter that we read a lot of times at weddings that, like, if you're doing all this stuff but you don't love people, then it's worthless. And so that's what the context into which this comes. And in his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul says that we are ministers of reconciliation. That God has given us the ministry of reconciliation because we are reconciled to God in Christ. And so we then are the agents of reconciliation in this world. So we join God in that ministry. But how are we supposed to join God in the ministry of reconciliation if we're afraid of conflict? How are we supposed to move into this reconciliation, which, yes, is about people to God, but it's also about people to one another? Because those are the two commandments, right, that Jesus calls out, that we love God and we love our neighbor. And the theologian Thomas Haley would say that there is no love of God if there's no love of neighbor. That our love of God is made evidence in how we love our neighbor. And so, if we're running from that, or we're shutting it down, or we're laughing it off, then we're not joining God in the ministry that God has handed us to be these ministers of reconciliation in our midst. So it's unavoidable, and it's unfaithful to the call on our lives. So let's just resolve to do it well, instead of shutting it down. So the first thing I want to encourage us as we think about conflict, and this is why I started with exercises where you're thinking and you're reflecting, and this is where I'm at, and this is how I would approach it, is check yourself before you wreck yourself. Boundaries. Know who you are and what you're bringing into the conflict. So for me, in the story that I shared earlier, where I'm trying to lead this song in the way that I want to lead it, and then my friend on the drums is like, you can't do it that way, I am immediately defensive and thinking to myself, he doesn't think I'm good enough, he's looking down on me, he's been doing this longer than I have, all these things, but I'm not aware of that. So I just snap off. But if I had paused for even just 2 seconds to be like, where am I at? What just got activated in me? What memory? How many of us have a memory from our childhood that may have nothing to do with what's even going on? That gets triggered, and we go right back there. So being aware, this is what I'm bringing into this. And if you're really charged up emotionally, to maybe say, hey, I need to deal with this, but can you give me a minute? Or like 120 minutes. Sometimes I need a while. But to be aware of that, knowing your leadership style and your personality type. If you are in leadership, please be aware of those things. There are different ways that people do life. There are different ways that personalities act in leadership roles. So whether that's Myers-Briggs or the DISC profiles, or there's like a million, but being aware of that for yourself and knowing what your own potential pitfalls are, but also what your strengths are in those times, and pulling and leading on those. Know your leadership structure and what you can or cannot do. So before you get into a conversation with somebody, know both what your role is and who else may need to be in the room. Knowing your church's polity, or like the way that it's structured, so that as you're listening to someone complain or listening to somebody who has a beef with you, you don't make promises you can't keep. And you can point them to a bigger structure too. So for me, I am beholden to an executive pastor and to our elder board. And there's things that I can't promise without those people. And so like as much as I would love to solve all your problems because I'm a people pleaser, I might not be able to do that for you. So bringing in those people if needed, whether it's because you can't make that decision without them, or like the Matthew 18 passage says, they're just not listening to you. Those are good people to come and bring them in as well. Own what is yours and only that. That's a really hard problem for me. I like to do other people's emotional work for them. because I want to save you the trouble, and I probably know what's best for you anyway, so if you would just give me all your anxiety, I can fix that for you. Except I can't. You can only own what is yours in conflict. So even as you have those initial conversations for yourself, even if the other person isn't observing it, using statements that are I statements. This is how I see this. This is what I hear you saying. This is what I can do about that. Or what would you like me to do about that? Because you can only own yourself in that space. You can't do anyone else's emotional work for them. And sometimes I think when we swoop in and we're trying to do that for someone else, we rob them of the opportunity for growth and maturity themselves. We rob them of the opportunity to encounter God in that space of conflict, to wrestle with God, which is, there's a huge tradition in that we wrestle with God, and that's how God meets us. So if we seek to do it for them, we miss the opportunity for them to encounter the Holy Spirit in transformative ways. Be willing to give the conflict space. So like Elizabeth was saying earlier, that if it's like really emotional and like really just intense, being willing to say, okay, time out, we're going to revisit this when. But not to ignore it. And that's where I get caught, because I'm like, oh, this is really intense, we'll deal with this later. Or just not. So be willing to let it drop, to let it de-escalate, but also don't ignore it. So some tactics and strategies, which this isn't going to be exhaustive, because like I said, it was a whole class on this, but some of the ones that I think are most helpful is take names and commit to the process. How many of us in the church, I feel like the church is maybe worse at it than other places, where you'll get like anonymous suggestions? That either if you have like a survey that goes out or a box, like people just put it in anonymously, or like somebody will come to you and be like, someone wants you to know that. Okay, those voices don't get to count. If you're not going to own your piece, you don't get to be part of the process. And so if it's somebody coming up to you and saying, someone wants you to know, okay, who is that so I can go talk to them? Oh, they don't really want to be identified. Okay, I can't do anything with that. And that's a fair boundary. That can feel really mean in the church because we just want to love people and we want everybody to count. You don't get to count if you don't have a name. So take names and commit to the process. Some conflicts, it's an afternoon, and it's like, let's just sit down, let's talk about this, let's get it through. Some conflicts take a long time, and they can take months to go through. They can take, for some cataclysmic events in churches, it can take 2 years or more for congregations to stabilize. And if you're going through one of those, I have some books that I would recommend for that. But you have to commit to the process, and all parties have to commit to it. If you're from the get-go kind of like, I have an issue with this, but if this is going to take more than an afternoon, I'm out. You might as well not start if it's a big conflict, because everybody needs to be bought in. So if that means you sit down and you say this is the nature of the conflict, and you think, okay, well this one is really big and it's going to involve both the lead pastor and the worship leaders and some other people on the team, this might take a couple months of us meeting once a week. Can you commit to an hour a week for the next 2 months? And if they're like, nah, then you might just have to be like, okay, then you need to drop this. Because we have to do this together. You gotta reject assumptions. I love this from Pete Scazzaro in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Every time I make an assumption about someone who has hurt or disappointed me without confirming it, I believe a lie about that person. Which is a more churchy way of saying the whole when you have a Zoom, it makes an ass out of you and me. But so that is a more churchy way of saying it. But I believe a lie about them. I wouldn't spread lies about somebody, except for maybe to my own self, because I believe my own assumptions. Listen well, and listen without an intent to respond. So often when we're listening to someone, our brain is already thinking, this is what I'm going to say back to that, and I know you think that this happened, but this is how it really went, and you may not be aware of this policy, and this is when we tried that. Just listen, without seeking to respond. Reframe, restate, and repeat. So, talking about those, reframing. You want to listen for the emotion or intent driving harsh statements and then reframe them. So often when people are worked up about something or they're really just like, they might fly off with something like when I was trying to lead the song, like, you don't really care about this anyway, like you're not invested. And what he meant was, I really care about the integrity of these songs and the value that the songwriter has put into them, and I'd like to preserve that. But that's not what I heard. But the elder that was in that room helped me hear that, because he could hear what was going on underneath all the emotion. So if you hear someone saying something like, well, Ashley, you don't care about fashion, and that's why you're asking me to change. So what I hear you saying is it's important to you that you look nice on Sunday mornings, and you want to be up to date and current with your fashion. Is that correct?
Of course.
So, allowing that person to speak back into your reframe to clarify where you may have gotten it wrong. And like 9 times out of 10, just that you're trying to hear what's behind it, their emotion level is going to come down as well. So reframe, being tough on the issue, but soft on the person as you're doing that. So, okay, no, this is an issue. This is an issue. We can't just sing songs from 1988 all the time. But I can be soft with Wallace. I feel like that's probably too old of a name for 1988, but I can be hard on the fact that this song is not relevant anymore and nobody likes singing it, and it died 10 years ago. But I can be soft on you. And being able to separate those things. How am I soft on the person, hard on the issue? Restate. So while you're listening, especially if there's more than one person involved, recall relevant statements or running themes in a person's narrative and restate them. So if you keep hearing the same thing over and over and over again, hey, yeah, this is really important to you, isn't it? Because you mentioned that earlier too. And not in a condescending way. This is really valuable. I really hear your strong value for making sure that we still have both styles of music. I keep hearing that from you. I'm going to write that down. That seems really important. Taking notes is okay. Let people know if you're going to take notes, because it freaks them out if you don't. But saying like, hey, this is important to me, and I want to make sure that I'm accurately listening to you, so I'm going to take some notes. And usually people are like, okay, great, yeah, please take notes. Repeating. As you're listening, let the speaker know that you're listening, both by nonverbal cues. Be careful with nodding, because people think that nodding is agreeing. But staying engaged, maybe with a or a I hear you. Or from time to time. So what I hear you saying, Elizabeth, is, Evan, I heard you say, and don't use the same one over and over again, but thinking of multiple ways to say, like, this is what I heard, and repeat it back to them. To stay engaged in the listening process. Be hard on issues, soft on people. Allow space for healing to take place. So if you're in a conversation, and all of a sudden there's this, like, emotion that just, like, rises up, and somebody starts to be like, and it starts coming out either in tears or in, like, just like crazy, like, language or whatever, that you follow that. Instead of being like, oh, okay, well, we're all getting really emotional, let's revisit this next time, all right? But seeing that just like how we get activated and we may go back to whatever memory and pull that to where we're at now, that can happen as we're mediating too. And allowing that, okay, well, I can see we really touched a nerve here, Evan. I can tell that you seem really emotionally worked up right now. I'm partly using you because that's kind of ironic. But I can see you're really emotionally worked up right now. Can you say more about that? can you say what's going on right now? And letting that, because sometimes there's things in that space that need to be healed that we don't even know about. And kind of following that and prayerfully following the Holy Spirit and the work that He may be doing in that space. And then don't rush the process. Like I said, being willing to take that time to work through it and getting people to commit. And as you're going, if you're like, actually this is going to take more than once a week for 2 months, we're going to need to work on this for longer, keeping people engaged with what you're seeing and saying, hey, like, this is more complex than we initially thought. We want to make sure everyone is heard and valued and is honored in this process. So we're going to put it, we're going to extend for this long, or here are some additional dates that we're looking at, and keeping people in that process as you go. One more thing on that last one is, as much as it's important to know who you are and what your leadership style is, your personality is, if you're in a position where you're leading a team, that's good information for your whole team to have too. So whether you're doing, I tend to think Myers-Briggs is not as helpful in this instance, but knowing things like disc profiles, because then you kind of know who the dominant people are, or who are the people who are going to be the balloons and the strings, or doing something like the Enneagram or Strengths Finder, so you kind of know, okay, Ashley is really going to have a hard time coming to me with something that seems conflictual. So if she's coming to me and saying, hey Megan, I need to talk to you about this, I need to recognize that that's taking so much energy for her to do that. Whereas, someone else might be like, okay, well, no, this person is a very conflictual person. And so when they're coming at me with something like, it's like breathing for them, like they're not even thinking about this. So but being aware of those things as a team is really helpful. We do a lot with the Enneagram with our worship team. Self-plug, I teach that. But as we work through that as a team, we've also gotten better both at caring for one another and in doing our conflict better. Because we know more about, okay, this is what this person is naturally going to think of themselves in this instance. So like you did make a mistake there. This is how I'm going to approach it differently because I know who you are. So, a couple things that you may be thinking. You don't know the people I'm dealing with, though. So get to know your team preemptively. All it is on this slide. So knowledge is power. Help your team see what gifts and challenges each of them brings into a conflict, because everyone does. It's not that there's some people that are good at conflict and some people that are bad at conflict. Just like with so many other things, we all have a different thing that we bring, and we're better when we all bring those things. Kind of like a potluck, right? Like it's a really crappy potluck if like only one person shows up with their dish. But if we all bring something, then it's really good, usually. Be clear about the goals, vision, and boundaries for your team. So if you're in a position of leadership, then you can set this, and you need to set it. Because if there's no vision, the people perish. And that goes for lead pastors, and so maybe you need to like check in with your pastor before you set a vision for your team to make sure that they're cool with it. But you need one too for your team, so that you know this is where we're going, this is how we're going to get there. Because how many times also does conflict happen because people don't know what the goal is and how you're going to get there, and we feel anxious because there's uncertainty. So be clear about the goals, vision, and boundaries for your team. So you have personal boundaries. Like my team knows that I don't check my email or our Slack page on Saturdays, because it's usually my day with my family. So if you need something, you need to get with me by Friday, or you need to know it's not going to happen until Sunday morning when we show up for practice. So being clear about your boundaries, both for yourself and for your team. So if you have people that are more likely to just kind of nitpick on each other, like even during rehearsal, and you don't want that, being clear with your team, that's not going to be tolerated. And if I see it happening, then we're going to have a conversation, because this tears us down as a team. So being clear about your goals, vision, and boundaries for your team. Set boundaries for people who will not set their own. So not everybody is going to be okay with this. And people who are unhealthy or toxic or have like they're not self-aware, They're in the habit of seeking to take everybody else's energy and trying to get confirmation from everywhere but between themselves and the Holy Spirit. So if they won't set their own boundaries, you can set them for them. And just be like, okay, I hear you, Krista, and you've made that point a few times now. I understand that's important. We're done talking about that for today. And if they keep like, okay, thank you, and we're done. Because you can't just keep letting that person spiral. We've all met people like that, who like, if they're worked up, everybody's coming with them. And as leaders, we have a responsibility to say, you can get worked up, but you're going to do that with yourself. And we're not going to let you do it with everybody else, because that's emotionally unsafe for everybody else on this team. So I have a responsibility as the leader to say, no, you can't do that. And no is a complete sentence. Like if you have mediated and you've listened and you, thank you, Krista, that was wonderful. Eventually, no is fine. And if people get mad, then okay, come see me Tuesday. Let's talk about this then. Don't say to a third party what you wouldn't say directly to the person themselves, though. So if you are setting some boundaries for someone, don't go be like, hey, Ashley, I set these boundaries for Krista. No, Krista needs to know those. Ashley doesn't. And then always look for these words. And these might help you identify who those people are that need some boundaries from you. Words like always, you never, all these people, everyone's singing, none of this makes any sense, I heard from so-and-so. Red flag that person in your mind. Not as like you're a bad person, but you might need more boundaries. Those words aren't helpful because it's never always. And it's never, never. And it's never all. Address frustrations and conflicts as they arise. Again, that's from that Matthew 18 passage. If your brother or sister sins against you, just go directly to them. Address it as it arises rather than letting it build up. You don't know how bad this conflict is. This is really serious. Every conflict has an opportunity for the Spirit to work. The Chinese symbol for conflict is danger and opportunity, laid on top of each other. Isn't that beautiful? Danger and opportunity. More intense conflicts may require substantial boundaries, mediation contracts, or even outside help, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you or your team or your church are like hopelessly broken. We all need help, and that's okay to ask for. And we only fail when we refuse to engage it at all. Also, a mutual decision to part ways, even if that may make us sad, is still a resolution. If you're going through and you're mediating and you're just like, we are just not going to get to a place where we see eye to eye on this, even both of you, both parties saying, this isn't going to work, is a resolution. And you're both coming to that place, so it honors both people then too.